Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the 8th century BC, and the kingdom of Israel is, well, it's booming. I mean, they're prosperous, they're powerful, and they are completely 100% confident that they are God's chosen people. They feel untouchable, eternally favored. But just under that shiny surface, something really dark is starting to grow, and a lone prophet named Amos, he's about to blow the whole thing wide open.
Now, for the people of Israel, hearing these words, this would have felt so good. It was the bedrock of their whole identity. You only have I known. I mean, that's a confirmation of their unique, special relationship with God. They saw it as this divine insurance policy, a guarantee of protection and ultimately victory. But what if they had it all backwards? What if this promise they held so dear wasn't a promise at all? What if it was actually a terrifying warning in disguise? This right here, this is the core tension of Amos's entire message. To really get the shock of what's coming, you have to get inside their heads for a second. They truly believed their covenant with God was a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. It made them better than their neighbors and, in their minds, totally immune to the kind of disasters that happen to other nations. They were on God's team, and hey, God's team always wins, right? And then Amos just drops the bomb. He takes their most comforting belief and turns it into a weapon against them. You only have I known, therefore I will punish you. It's one of the most jaw-dropping reversals in all of prophetic literature. Their special status wasn't a shield, it was a magnifying glass, and it was held right over all their sins. So this is a total, radical reframing of their entire world. They thought being chosen meant divine protection. Amos comes along and says, nope, it means divine accountability. They saw their status as a reason to be proud. Amos reveals it's the very reason they're going to be punished. Their special relationship didn't get them off the hook. It made them the most responsible. So what exactly had they done to deserve this? Amos wasn't pointing fingers at foreign idols or weird pagan stuff. His accusation was aimed right at the heart of their own society, which he said was built on this rotten foundation of greed and injustice. And this is absolutely key. The nation's biggest sin, according to Amos, wasn't something happening out there. It was the corruption deep inside. It was all about how the rich and powerful were treating the most vulnerable people in their own community. Turns out, their love for God was being judged by how they treated their neighbor.
And Amos gets incredibly specific here. This wasn't just a few bad apples. The whole system was the problem. The elite were just gobbling up ancestral family lands. They were converting farms that used to feed local families into these big cash crop operations for export. And guess what? That creates food shortages for the poor, who then fall into debt. And those debt laws, which were supposed to be temporary, were being twisted into a tool to permanently steal their land. The whole system was rigged.
The result was that human lives, actual people, the righteous and the needy, were being valued at less than a little bit of silver, less than a new pair of sandals. This one verse just captures the horrifying reality of how little people mattered in their supposedly prosperous society.
So Amos wasn't just diagnosing a problem here, he was delivering a verdict. The prosperity they were all so proud of, it was built on sin, and a day of reckoning was coming. And the crazy part is, it was a day they were actually looking forward to, but for all the wrong reasons.
Ah, the day of the Lord. For Israel, this was the ultimate hope. This was the day God was finally going to show up, smash all their enemies, and set up their kingdom forever. They couldn't wait for it. It was going to be a day of light and parties and total vindication.
But then Amos brings another massive plot twist. He tells them, "Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord." And they're like, why? Because it won't be light, it will be darkness. The divine warrior they were waiting for wasn't coming to fight for them, he was coming to fight against them. They thought it was Judgment Day for all the other nations, but the crosshairs were pointed right at Israel.
What comes next is one of the most terrifying and just visceral descriptions of divine judgment in the entire biblical text. Amos really wants them to feel the horror of what's coming, to try and shake them out of this comfortable sleep they're in.
What a brutal image. Amos says that after God, the roaring lion, is done with Israel, all that's going to be left are pathetic little scraps. Not even whole survivors, just proof that the slaughter was total and completely devastating.
He calls the wealthy, complacent women of the capital fat cows. And he says they'll be dragged from their fancy houses into exile like cattle, with hooks through their mouths. It's this picture of complete and utter humiliation, turning their luxury into an instrument of their own torture. And the aftermath is it's chilling.
Even in a house where, say, 10 people somehow make it through the initial attack, a plague will come and finish them all off. And the one lone survivor, who's left to deal with the bodies, will be so terrified that if someone asks if anyone else is left, he'll just whisper, "Hush, we can't even say the Lord's name," because he's afraid God might remember he's still there and come finish the job. God goes from being a comfort to a source of pure terror. And it all builds up to this one, stark command. Now, this is not an invitation to a worship service. This is a court summons. It's a soldier's cry before battle. It's the final, terrifying order to stand up and face the roaring lion that you yourself have provoked. But, and this is maybe the most important twist of all, this horrifying prophecy, this vision of absolute destruction, it wasn't a fixed sentence. It was a final, desperate, blaring alarm clock designed to wake them up before it was truly too late.
You see, God didn't send Amos just to condemn them. The whole point of the roaring lion, of making the threat so vivid and so terrifying, was to give Israel one last chance to turn around. The warning was the mercy. And here it is, the alternative. It's presented in just a few simple words. In the middle of all that fire and doom, this is the escape hatch. It's this profound invitation just hanging in the air, seek me and live.
But what does seeking God actually look like? Amos is crystal clear. It's not about more sacrifices or fancier worship songs. First, seek the Lord himself, not just religious stuff. Second, a fundamental change of heart. Learn to hate what's evil and truly love what's good. And third, and this is the big one, make that love tangible. Establish justice in the gate, which was basically their courthouse. It meant fixing the broken, corrupt system from the ground up.
So in the end, the message of Amos really just boils down to a timeless choice. A choice between two different ways of being God's people. Two completely different definitions of what real religion is all about.
And this is his final, iconic plea. God basically says, I'm sick of the noise of your songs. I won't listen. What he wants isn't a performance. He wants justice. And not just a trickle of it, but a flood. Not some creek that dries up in the summer, but a powerful, constant, life-giving river of righteousness that flows through the whole land. That is the true worship God is after.
Which leaves us with a question that echoes down from the 8th century BC right into our world today. The prophet Amos forced his people to see that their privilege came with a huge amount of responsibility. And when those two things collide, what does an ever-flowing stream of justice demand from us right here, right now?